We are now at the point where the Russian invasion of Ukraine has lasted longer than the Soviet Union's Great Patriotic War against Germany. Almost 4 years have passed since the start of the war, which was supposed to be a short and victorious war for Putin. But here we are. Russia is still very far away from realizing its war aims, but this does not decrease the suffering imposed by them on the Ukrainians. Welcome to our first update on the war in Ukraine in 2026, where we discuss the increased pace of Russian airstrikes, further attempts at diplomacy, and more. Do you know why thousands of people on YouTube and Patreon support us financially? Because they get history you won't find anywhere else. We release 3 new exclusive videos every week. Plus, they get perks like early access to all videos, voting rights on upcoming series and videos, access to our private Discord, our production schedule, and much more. Right now, 250 exclusive episodes are waiting for members and patrons, including from our series on the Eastern Front of World War II, Spanish War of Succession, the Punic Wars, the Pacific War, the Iberian Reconquista, the Russian Revolution and Civil War, the North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, Sicilian Wars between the Greeks and Carthaginians, and many others. By joining, you're not only unlocking rare content, you're also supporting the stories you love. Your help allows us to keep producing 3 free videos per week while paying our team competitive salaries and growing the channel. Join via the links in the description, the pinned comment, or by pressing the join button under the video. Thanks for making this possible. Extremely cold weather in Ukraine has slowed what was already a creeping Russian advance on the battlefield, but heavy fighting continues in many sectors. Ukrainian defenders still operate in Pokrovsk, but for all intents and purposes, the battle seems to be over, as the Russian army has already advanced north towards Rishina. They have also regained some of the previously liberated land towards Novoshakovye. Another battle which we can expect to start soon is for the southernmost tip of the Ukrainian fortress belt of Donbas. Russia has made minimal progress in its pincer movement on Kostiantynivka. Kostiantynivka has been the next Russian target on this axis ever since the capture of Turgut in August 2025. Several months later, they have still failed to gain a solid foothold inside the town, and are moving forward at a creeping pace. Looking at the northern tip of the fortress belt, we can see more notable progress in the Siversk sector over December and January, as this heavily fortified town has been captured by the Russians. They are attempting another pincer movement in the Lyman sector, and are attacking to capture Yampil and Drobyshevo. Much of the former has already been captured, as we are about to see another battle for Lyman in this war. If the Russian army succeeds there, they would be some 20 to 25 kilometers away from Slavyansk, another heavily fortified town in Donbas, which Putin demands that the Ukrainians give up without a fight as a precondition for a ceasefire. Regarding the Kupiansk sector, a very curious situation is developing from a public relations standpoint. The Russian Ministry of Defense keeps insisting that it is in control of Kupiansk, despite mountains of evidence proving otherwise. At this point, the Ukrainians still control most of the town, even though some Russian pockets still operate in it. Not only do Russian officials deny it, but they are claiming control of towns around Kupiansk, a little further from the front line, for instance Kupiansk-Vezlovye. When the Russian command does that, the real units on the ground are forced to go on assaults to actually fulfill the declarations of their ministry in real life. Such assaults often lead to even higher losses for the Russian army. So predictably, many Russian military bloggers, who are actually aware of the situation on the battlefield, are very unhappy. Some of the less active sectors of the battlefield, like Sumy and Vovchansk, are getting hotter, as the Russians are stepping up their assaults there and gaining ground, presumably to create a buffer around the border areas. A goal set by Putin a long time ago that the Russian army is far from fulfilling. A concerning situation for Ukraine continues to develop on the Zaporizhia front. Russia has now taken control of most of Huliopole. Huliopole is one of the few relatively major towns in this sector, and its fall would enable the Russian army to continue its westward advance in the flatlands. Another advance is progressing along the Kakhovka Reservoir. Russia has captured Stepnohersk and has apparently reached the Kinska River. Now their next goal is to cross the river in order to continue their advance on the presumed target of their offensive, the city of Zaporizhia. They are still 20 kilometers from the city's outskirts, but the Ukrainian command will likely need to bring in reserves to check the Russian advance here. But arguably the bigger challenge for Ukraine right now is the Russian airstrike campaign against Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Russia has been launching several hundred Shahed-type drones, combined with a few ballistic missiles, very regularly. The Ukrainian air defense is shooting down most of them, but every time several drones and missiles get through, and that is enough to do considerable damage. The Russian tactic is to saturate the Ukrainian air defenses with a massive number of drones, making it extremely difficult to shoot down all of them. Some inevitably reach their targets. On top of that, ballistic missiles with higher payloads are difficult to shoot down, due to the often mentioned lack of Patriot missiles. In the grand scheme of things, there is not a single country which would be able to shoot down everything all the time for 2 to 3 years in a row. But there are also specific problems caused by the lack of air defense systems and missiles, which allow more Russian drones and missiles to find their targets. As a result, the energy grid in Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy and Mykolaiv has been heavily damaged, leaving millions of Ukrainians without electricity or heating for extended periods during what has been the coldest weather in Ukraine in recent years. Due to freezing temperatures and a lack of heating, the household water supply has frozen in some areas as well. The Kyiv authorities have called on residents who could do so to evacuate the city. Close to 600,000 people did exactly that in January. The impact of the Russian winter airstrike campaign has already caused some public discontent. People in Kyiv and Odessa have protested against extended blackouts. For the time being, these are small protests, but these are worrying signs for Ukraine. The main goal of Putin's campaign of destruction is to break the will of the Ukrainian people to resist and force the government to surrender under pressure from the people. But both sides had agreed to a very short breather from each other's long-range strikes at the time of writing. On January 29th, Trump declared that he had persuaded Putin to a week-long stop on airstrikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure in exchange for Ukraine not targeting its oil infrastructure. While this initiative and agreement were praised by Zelensky, many wonder whether they will still allow Russia to stockpile more missiles and drones for larger strikes once the ceasefire is over. Still, this agreement is notable, at the very least, because it was the first tangible result of Donald Trump's attempt to end the war. But it is hard to see it as a sign of things to come, because the sides cannot agree on the biggest points of dispute, the territorial question and the issue of security guarantees. Russia continues to mimic the diplomatic process by talking with the Americans on the one hand, while insisting on maximalist, ever-changing demands on the other. One day they ask for Donbas. Another day they talk about Odessa. On the third day they demand the rollback of NATO from Central Europe and the renegotiation of European security infrastructure. This indicates that Putin is not really interested in good faith talks. He seeks military victory and the capitulation of Ukraine. They are also looking for pretexts to exit negotiations. On December 29th, the foreign minister of Russia, Lavrov, claimed that Ukrainian drones attacked Putin's residence in Novgorod Oblast. Ukraine immediately refuted this claim, and later Trump stated that he did not believe that Ukraine attacked Putin. Such false claims are part of the Kremlin's military-political propaganda push to win over those who are on the fence, and to portray Ukraine as the real aggressor in this war, which is not interested in negotiations. Remember how in 2022, Russia's then Defense Minister Shoigu was calling all Western counterparts, accusing Ukraine of preparing to launch a mythical dirty bomb. This is the continuation of the same strategy. At this point, there are two separate diplomacy tracks. In one of them, Ukraine and its closest European allies, France, Britain and others, with the outside participation of the United States, discuss potential security guarantees and the deployment of the Coalition of the Willing, following the conclusion of the war. A lot is still unknown, but according to American, European and Ukrainian officials, progress is being made. On January 6th, Ukraine, France and Britain signed a declaration declaring the intent of France and Britain to deploy their armed forces in Ukraine to deter any threats against Ukraine on land, air and sea, along with helping Ukraine build up its army, and involving more European countries to join in different capacities. Again, there is nothing concrete, but for instance, there is an indication that Sweden may deploy its Gripen fighter jets to help defend Ukrainian skies after the ceasefire. The British government has already announced the allocation of £200 million for the deployment of its troops to post-war Ukraine, a signal that the Coalition of the Willing is something that at least Britain and France are taking seriously, and intend to push beyond the realm of declaratory politics. The US State Secretary Rubio has also confirmed the agreement on security guarantees for Ukraine, which envisages the deployment of a small European force supported by the United States. But according to the Financial Times, the Trump administration will provide these security guarantees, including weapons supply and security pledges similar to NATO's Article 5, only if Ukraine agrees to Russia's territorial demands regarding Donbas. But at this point, Russia is vehemently opposed to any Western deployment to Ukraine as part of the peace or ceasefire deal, thus it is unclear how this process will proceed. The second diplomatic track involves the American shuttle diplomacy with Ukraine and Russia. There has not been any breakthrough. The most notable development was the trilateral meeting involving the US, Ukraine and Russia in Abu Dhabi on January 24th. It was the first such official meeting between Kyiv and Moscow since the 2022 Istanbul talks. Some progress was reported on ceasefire monitoring and coordination, but the question of Donbas remained the sticking point. Nevertheless, the newly appointed Chief of Staff of Zelensky, the former military intelligence chief Kyrylo Budanov, who is not one to mince words, expressed cautious optimism about the talks. At the very least, the sides agreed to continue discussions. But while the sides continue talking, the war of course is still going on, and Ukraine still relies on foreign military aid, particularly in terms of air defense to defend against the unrelenting air threat from Russia. On January 1st, Ukraine received 2 Patriot air defense systems, earlier promised by Germany. Later in the month, following direct talks with Trump, Zelensky secured an unspecified number of Patriot missiles. British officials reported that they have sent 13 Raven air defense systems and 2 newly developed Gravehawk air defense systems, while also announcing the production of Octopus interceptor drones developed to counter Russian Shahed-type drones. The British Defence Minister Healey claims that Octopus is cheaper than Shahed, which is extremely important given that Shaheds are typically very cheap. Britain has also pledged support for Ukrainian startups focusing on air defense systems and drones, along with promising £20 million for the maintenance of the embattled energy infrastructure of Ukraine. Italy, Norway and Japan have also promised equipment and money to support Ukraine's energy system. On February 16th, Czechia announced that they will send an unnamed combat aircraft to shoot down drones. In non-air defense-related military aid, the German delivery of 5 Lynx Kf-41 infantry fighting vehicles, the British pledge to develop Nightfall short-range ballistic missiles, and Finland's military aid package worth almost €100 million stand out. You may have noticed from our recent updates on foreign aid to Ukraine that there have been fewer aid announcements in recent months. There can be several explanations. While at the beginning of the war, Ukraine's allies preferred making public announcements of aid, now they are doing more work behind the scenes. Or maybe they are just giving less than at the beginning of the war. Ukraine is now producing artillery shells, drones, military vehicles, cruise missiles, and other assets in significant numbers. But they still require air defense systems and more sophisticated weapons systems to continue resisting the Russian invasion. Specifically, air defense remains crucial for Ukraine. They need to find a way to minimize the damage from Russian strikes, to have a chance at ending the war on a more or less equal footing with the Russians. Lastly, let's look at visually documented equipment losses suffered by both parties as of January 31st, according to the data compiled by the Oryx blog. Russia has lost at least 4,330 tanks, 10,650 vehicles, 313 command posts and communication stations, 2,662 artillery systems and vehicles, 174 aircraft, and 166 helicopters. Ukraine has lost at least 1,386 tanks, 5,954 vehicles, 84 command posts and communication stations, 1,159 artillery systems and vehicles, 113 aircraft, and 54 helicopters. Further updates on the Russian invasion of Ukraine are on the way. If you don't want to miss them, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.